You are listening to JosuBroadcast, Episode 0, The Pilot. Hi, how are you? I'm Josue. In this episode, I want to introduce myself and talk about why am I starting a podcast. If we haven't met before, fist bump greeting. I speak Spanish, but I want to learn and practice more English by having a podcast. Imagine that. I am unemployed now. I resigned my previous job more than a year ago because I wanted to have a change in my life. I like chess, exercising, and studying English by myself. My life is like I do nothing in the morning and I rest in the afternoon. I know it's bad, but I'm working on changing my life by having this podcast. I'm excited because this is the first episode in a series I have planned where I want to talk about hobbies. I will do my best to do a proper research in order to bring information about hobbies or video games. And yes, this is scripted. I have a notebook in my hands. I always wanted to have a podcast since 2017, but I didn't know how to do it. I was not into social media. I needed help. So I decided to look for a job like a normal person and let the destiny give me the opportunity to have a podcast one day. But you know the saying, once you get a job, the salary is what you receive to forget your dreams. And that's true, people. While I was working for a company, I didn't remember my dream until a few weeks ago. I was on my bed in the morning thinking about what is next in my life when the inner me reminds me of my dream, the podcast, and I can look for a job later. I don't want to have the best podcast ever, but I wish I could reach nice people. I have been watching some tutorials online. I have been learning how to use social media because I didn't have any account before. I feel like YouTube or Twitch were enough to spend time. But I'm learning how to use Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. Based on the information I found online about how to create a podcast, I want to mention 3 basic rules. Rule number 1. Don't share your feelings. Am I sharing my feelings now? Do I sound emotional? My voice is like this. One day a friend told me that my voice sounds like the guy announcing the flight at the airport. But which airport? This reminds me when the pandemic hit in 2020. I had planned to travel to another country, but all flights were cancelled. Now I am broke, and I cannot travel anymore. Anyway, rule number 2. To have an easy username to remember. This is the most difficult part, because at this point in life, it seems all usernames are not available. I came up with a few ideas, but none of them were available. I wanted to have a username that makes you understand that this is a podcast without using the word podcast. So I made a research about where the word podcast came from. And I read online that podcast is a combination of 2 words, iPod and broadcast. I know what an iPod is. It's a device to listen to the music, but what is a broadcast? And since English is my second language, I didn't know what a broadcast was. So I made another research and I learned that broadcast is related to a radio or a television program. And that's how I found my username. Broadcast can either be audio or video. That works if I do a live stream in the future. Rule number 3. Start with what you have. The majority of smartphones are good to have a podcast. Now smartphones have the option to record audio. They have their own microphone, and you can download an app to edit audio. I have a laptop and smartphone. I tried to record audio on the laptop, but the quality is not good. The smartphone has a better microphone. Although I can use headphones to record audio on the computer, I don't have good headphones. This gives me an idea for a future episode. I can talk about what is better between a computer and a smartphone. Some podcasts focus only on one topic. There are podcasts about learning English, practicing pronunciation. Some podcasts are about motivational speeches. But this podcast is going to be different. I want to practice English. The next episodes can be about hobbies. However, future episodes can be about anything. I can talk about sports, exercising, maybe motivational speeches, or whatever you want to listen to. I will do my best to bring it. Before finishing this episode, let's make a recap. In today's episode, I talked about 3 basic rules to create a podcast. Rule number 1, don't share your feelings. Rule number 2, to have an easy username to remember. And rule number 3, start with what you have. And that will be it. Let me know in the comments if you like any podcast. Have you ever listened to a podcast before? Do you know that you can listen to podcasts on Spotify or Google Podcasts? There are many options to listening to a podcast. This podcast is going to be available on Spotify and Google Podcasts. I still need to work on that, so bye. Thank you for listening to my podcast. If you like it, you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, whichever you prefer. See you then.